Well, all right, folks, I think we're going to get started. Diana, is everything good? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Perfectly. Well, good morning, everyone. I know that we have a lot more folks registered who are going to continue hopping on in the next 3 or 4 minutes, but we're already hitting that 60 to 70 mark. We have more than 130 people who are joining us today. I want to welcome you to the Gateways to Opportunity Higher Education 2022 Forum. This year's theme is so incredibly relevant: leading the way, early childhood education. Everyone in attendance today is a leader and an innovator, whether you're at a higher education institution, a foundation, or a state agency. Welcome to all of you leaders and innovators. It's time for us to get started. I know we're going to have people who keep coming on, so keep an eye in the chat. In the picture box, it's always fun to see who's joined us today. We have so much ground to cover over the next 2 days. As we launch our forum this morning, everybody always wants to know the who, what, when, and where. So we are going to take just a few minutes and review the agenda. We're going to find out a little bit more about who's in the audience, share how to access the Dropbox materials, and review a few Zoom features. I usually forget to introduce myself, so I'm going to do that right now. I am Joni Scritchlow, a Senior Director at INCCRRA, which among the many roles that INCCRRA has, INCCRRA also administers Gateways to Opportunity on behalf of the Illinois Department of Human Services. As we launch this year's forum, I want to say a special thank you to my wonderful colleague and coordinator, Julie Lindstrom, who manages 1,000 projects and a myriad of details, and to Diana Arsenault, our higher education liaison, who has done a ton of behind the scenes work in organizing the forum. Thank you, Diana, and thank you, Julie. We could not do it without you. As you can see by today's agenda, we are going to start off this morning with some opening remarks from Dr. Rick Pearce from Heartland Community College. And then we get to hear from a range of state agency panel presenters. This will be facilitated by Zach Allen from the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development. Please use the chat box today. Send your questions to Zach that you would like him to share with the panel members for their response and comments. We will hear 3 presentations, then we're going to follow that with a question and answer session, take a break, and then the rest of the state panel will present, followed by an additional opportunity to ask questions of panel members. After a welcome lunch break, then everyone can choose from 3 faculty-led interest sessions this afternoon, each of which highlights some exciting developments and higher education innovations in our state. Tomorrow, we're going to begin promptly at 8:30. Be sure you log in early. The morning is going to feature data presentations from both Joellen Whitehead at INCCRRA and Dr. Eric Lichtenberger from the Illinois Board of Higher Ed. Following these data presentations, everyone can choose from another set of interest sessions offered by faculty colleagues. And then we're going to wrap up the forum with wonderful keynote presentations featuring Christy Chadwick and Dr. Teresa Hawley, who leads the Illinois Early Childhood Transformation Team, and Dr. Jamila Jordan, the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development. As I think you can tell, we really have an amazing 2 days planned for you. So if we go back to the who, what, when, where, why, when we ask who's in the audience, we could say, well, colleagues and friends are in the audience, but I'm not sure that would tell you exactly what you want to know. We are so fortunate that almost every one of our higher education institutions in Illinois with early childhood programs are represented at this forum today. Our 130 to 140 registrants include faculty and deans, provosts, and vice presidents. A large number of higher education associates and colleagues have dedicated time to join us today. The list of institutions and attendees is way too long to read, so just know we are glad that all of you are here with us. Illinois is often envied when you talk at national levels because we have relationships built among our early childhood affiliated state agencies and our higher education partners. We are so fortunate to have the Governor's Office of Early Childhood Development, the Illinois Department of Human Services, the Illinois State Board of Education, the Illinois Board of Higher Education, and the Illinois Community College Board as key partners in attending, participating, and helping to plan the 2022 Gateways Higher Education Forum. We're also so privileged to have longstanding partnerships with the Illinois Head Start Association and the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, who, along with the Illinois Department of Human Services, have funded this forum for the last 15 to 20 years. And I would be very remiss if I didn't mention our national partner, who's also supported so much of the innovative work in Illinois, the National Competency-Based Education Network. Welcome, everyone. I want to say a huge thanks to those who provided input into how we designed this year's forum. Faculty who are members of Access and of the Illinois Association of Early Childhood Teacher Educators, along with the state agency representatives listed here on screen, all helped us design this year's forum. And a special thanks to Zach Allen, because he also agreed to facilitate the state panel today. And again, I want to do one more call out to the Professional Opportunities and Development team here at INCCRRA, and especially Julie and Diana for all the work they have done to bring this year's forum to you. We have some Dropbox features where you're able to pick up all of the materials and things that we're going to reference today. And I'm going to turn it over to Diana to share information on Dropbox and Zoom. Diana?
Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so happy to see your faces. This is going to be a great day. Tomorrow will be a great day too. So I want to go over the Dropbox features with you for a moment. As you can see on your screen, we have different files in the Dropbox. The interest sessions, there should be information in there about the different interest sessions for today and tomorrow. The resources file will have different resources for you, INCCRRA reports and such. And then we have our agenda and our speaker biographies. Check that out. They're all very interesting to read. We will be adding different files throughout the next couple of days just for the speakers. PDFs and such. So if you have any questions about the Dropbox, please email me and I will help you out. Now, the Zoom features, everybody's familiar with Zoom these days, I'm hoping. It's been a couple of years now that we've been doing this. So I do want to ask you to type your questions and answers into the chat, and please add the presenter's name and then your question. And as you type that in, please choose Zach Allen as the one to send that to. He will look over those, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the state panel presentations. And then you can share or obtain information directly with the host and presenters in the chat as well. If you have any problems, please email me. I am keeping an eye on that, or you can raise your hand as well. And I'll turn it back to Joni.
Thank you, Diana. All right, I think that's enough background to get us situated as we launch this year's forum. We want to get started now. Illinois is leading the way, and early childhood is one of the most innovative and creative programs at many institutions in our state. Today's forum is going to kick off with some opening remarks from an individual who will help set the stage by sharing some global and some local perspectives. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Rick Pearce. He's the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs at Heartland Community College. I think Rick is such an excellent example of an innovator and a forward thinker. Rick, I've heard so much about you. Your full bio is in that Dropbox, as Diana was just sharing, so I'm not going to read every single detail, but I want to say, Rick, thank you for joining us. Welcome. We're glad to hear what you have to say today. Rick?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Do you have my PowerPoint up and running, Joan?
Yes,
We
sure
can go
do.
to the advance to the first slide. Thank you so much. What I'd like to talk to you about a little bit today is just some things that we're doing here at Heartland that are helping to inform work across the state and the nation about aligning competency-based education, prior learning credit, stacked curriculum, career pathways, and industry-recognized certifications. And I want to stress that while I'm going to go through these things sort of one at a time, this is not a linear model. All of these are intertwined. They inform each other. They work together to create a really solid package that allows us to collaborate across the spectrum with industry partners, with incumbent workers, with students who are interested in entering the field and helping people not only find their pathway into the career, but allowing people who have already chosen this career to be able to advance within it. So I'd like to start with talking about competency-based education. Now, this is not really something new, although it seems to be getting a lot more traction and it's being talked about in a number of different ways. But for many years, we've been doing competency-based education in the community colleges, and particularly in career and technical education. And so health sciences is a good example of this. They do something called skills checkoffs. And so that really is based on identified competencies that they need for licensure and students demonstrating competency to their instructor and getting that checked off. And so that type of thing has been happening for quite a number of years. And now we're just looking at how can we apply that competency-based in other programs. And even in nursing, competency-based still translates into Carnegie units. So they're still transferring courses if they move on or acquiring course credits, where really a purely competency-based program may not be tied so strictly to those Carnegie units. But what it does is it allows you to identify what a person needs to know and to be able to do, and at what stage in their career path do they need to know that and be able to do it, because that's going to change over time. And tying that directly to the curriculum is really critical. Let's move on to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit about prior learning credit. Once we've identified competencies, it's easier then to say, let's look at incumbent workers and see if they've already achieved those competencies through on-the-job training or some other credentialing that may have happened in the industry, and be able to give them that credit without requiring them to spend the time in the classroom to achieve that competency. And that allows us to speed up time to completion. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that an individual is going to achieve things more quickly in their life cycle, but it speeds up the time at an institution in that formal educational setting. And what's really critical to be able to do this is how we set up the curriculum. What we look at is stacked curriculum. It's often called modularization, although that term sometimes scares people, but that's okay. The idea of a stacked curriculum is that you look at those competencies and you put those into smaller units that are aligned with the competencies so that you can allow someone coming into the institution to be able to gain those credits based on demonstrating that they have those competencies. And that, again, if instead of having small units, you had large units, 3 credit hours, 6 credit hours, whatever, even though a student might come in and have competency in half of those outcomes, you're still requiring them to do the full course. But by creating smaller units that are stacked, it allows you to pick and choose what prior learning they have credit for and remove those courses from their plan of study. So it really facilitates that prior learning credit. It also allows you to align those smaller modules with industry recognized certifications. And that way you can take your curriculum and ladder it in such a way that it mirrors the career path that the student would be on. And it allows them to come on or off of your plan at various points in time. And that's a little scary, I know, especially the off-ramp. It sometimes frightened us to think someone's going to be in our program and then walk away, but life happens. And what you want to be able to do is allow them to have credit for what they've achieved before they had to step away, and then allow them to be able to step back in when they're ready to do that. And so having clean on and off ramps is really important for the success of our students. And also by having these smaller modules and a stacked curriculum, you allow them to get early and often success. And that's really critical. We know that if a student can get some kind of a measurable success early on, they're more likely to persist and complete. And by providing for them benchmarks where we're saying, here, you've succeeded in this, you succeeded again, you succeeded again, that inspires them to continue to do that work. It's really critical that we align these stacked curriculum with the career pathway. That's not always the way it was in the past. Oftentimes we would take all of the various learning outcomes that we know a student needed, and we see that as a global package, and we create curriculum that leads to that global package. But it didn't reflect the reality of what might happen if they were in that career. And that doesn't allow for those clean on and off ramps. It doesn't allow for clean PLA. It doesn't allow for someone who's an incumbent worker to get credit for what they've already done. So we need to identify what seems to be the intrinsic pathway in the profession. And I know it varies for individuals, but generally we can see what the general pathway is and align our curriculum with that pathway. Again, providing clean on and off ramps and also making it really clear that the curriculum fits within the career. Now, my background is East Asian history, and I can't tell you how many times I had students say to me, how does this apply to what I'm going to do in my career? Now, I had an answer to that, but wouldn't it have been better if it was obvious to them how this fit into their career? By having this career pathway clearly identified and linking our curriculum directly to it, it becomes very clear to the student exactly how this curriculum benefits them, aligns with their career, and helps them move forward. It's also important that we recognize industry recognized certifications. These are things like gateways that allows us to see how someone can demonstrate those competencies. It provides for a clear meaning to an individual that sometimes is lost if we're just providing college credit-bearing micro certificates or degrees. It often doesn't demonstrate as clearly that they've met those competencies as would be demonstrated by industry recognized certifications. Those become tangible markers of success that can translate easily to employment or advancement within their career. And so we want to embed achievement of those industry recognized certifications in our curriculum. Again, aligning those modules in a logical sequence that leads to attainment of various levels of certification as they progress through the program. And again, that allows for clean off-ramps and on-ramps. Someone who achieves Gateway 2, if they need to leave for some reason, they have something that demonstrates their ability. And if somebody already has that certification out in the workforce, if they come to us, we know exactly where we need to put them in our curriculum for them to complete the rest of the program. So those certifications are really important to embed. Lastly, if we move to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about what's happening here at Heartland Community College. And I have to give proper respect to Dr. Joni Ernst. Joni is, many of you know her, I'm sure, and she is an outstanding advocate for the education of early childhood educators. And she took this model that we talked about some years ago, and she applied it to early childhood education here at Heartland. She broke apart our curriculum, completely re-envisioned it, created modules that were about 1 credit hour courses, sequenced those courses to allow for accomplishment of those certifications along the pathway. It allows for a much easier application of prior learning assessments when students come to us who are incumbent in the industry already. And it really supports the students by providing clear competency markers, early and often successes, and again, those on-ramps and off-ramps that are clear to them and allow them to have those success as they move through our program. And so really kudos to Joni. She's really leading the path on this. And I love to get credit for everything she's doing, but God knows she's doing it on her own. So I just try to support her. And with that, I want to wrap up my comments. But if you move to the next slide, it has my contact information. If you have any questions about what we're doing here, I'd be happy to try and answer those, or to push you off onto Joni for a more detailed explanation of what she's been doing. But I really do appreciate being with you today. And I look forward to hearing what you all have to say as the day progresses. Joni, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rick. And I'm going to take just a minute here and see if we have some questions or anything for Rick. That was just very powerful. And I so appreciated hearing you talk about how we think about aligning like competency-based education and prior learning credit and stacked curriculum and the career pathways that it actually develops for our workforce. So I want to take just a minute and see if there are any questions that anyone wants to ask. I don't want to put you in the hot seat here, but I thought we might be able to take just a question or two if someone has something that they'd like to take. Let's put Rick's contact information back on the screen here too for just a minute, because that allows everyone to have an opportunity if they want to reach out and contact you, Rick, or ask questions, because I know it's a it's a change in, it can be somewhat of a change in directions for some institutions to think of things in the way in which you've kind of mapped it out. So it's just kind of a little bit of a different approach. I'm checking. So here we have one question. What are some of the conversations that might be happening among some of your chief academic officer peers and other institutions about this type of work? What are other leaders in the state thinking and doing in relationship to what you just talked about?
Yeah, a lot of what we've been talking about among, say, the chief academic officers is really the challenge that's presented in the transfer of these credits, particularly prior learning assessment credits. If you're doing something that's an applied associate degree, in the past that was considered a terminal degree, and we don't want to consider it that way anymore. We want to make sure that students are allowed to progress in their education. So we need to work with receiving institutions like our public universities to accept those credits so that the student doesn't have to redo something they've already done that we've given them credit for. And that is the biggest challenge. The universities expect that any prior learning credit they're going to give is something they've assessed. And the way that we can overcome that is by clearly identifying competencies and how those are recognized in the industry. And once we've done that, then it's easier to say to the universities in Illinois, hey, look, this student should get credit for this because they have this industry recognized certification, that whether it came to us that way or whether we help them achieve it, it's an easier method than simply saying, we think their job is good enough to give them credit. Instead, we're saying, clearly they've done what they need to do to get this certification, and you should allow them credit. And that really is the biggest challenge. I think a lot of my colleagues are questioning, how can we shift to this competency-based model and still allow for the smooth transfer of credits onto the university? And I can tell you that the earlier efforts in competency-based, which goes back a long time ago to universities in Chicago, was based on terminal degrees. Because if you're the last say in whether somebody gets a credit, you can apply prior learning pretty easily. But for a community college, we're not usually the last say. We're often the first action that a student is taking, and that makes it challenging. But we're overcoming it little by little.
Rick, thank you for that. We have one more question that's come in, kind of a follow-up type of question, if you will. As you think about this, what are some of the maybe equity implications for this approach? How might some of the strategies that you've discussed really help recruitment or retention or completion rates?
I think initially I would say, as far as recruitment, what's really beautiful about this model is that we can actually approach people who are out there in the industry. And many of them are working in a situation where they may not even have any educational background at all. But we can reach out to them, we can show them how we can give them credit for what they're learning on the job. And that's a good recruitment tool. And then as far as success and completion, I really believe there are a couple critical components, and I mentioned these earlier. One is that clear line between the curriculum and the career, understanding that pathway, and then giving them those often success marks so that they're achieving something. There's nothing as disheartening to me as somebody who is a few credit hours away from a degree, has to leave because life got in the way, and they've got nothing to show for what they did. When you hear somebody say, I've got some hours towards a degree, that's not as powerful as being able to say, I achieved these 6 certifications while I was at Heartland, and I'm ready to move on to the next level. So that really is something that helps them persist. And again, as much as we want persistence and completion, we have to recognize that life does get in the way. So how can we make it as easy as possible for students to go off ramp and back on ramp? How can we make it possible for them, if they have to go off, to have something to show for what they've done? And if they're doing something out in industry, how can we allow them to on ramp easily and to get credit for what they've done? So those are a couple of things that I think this methodology really helps to support.
Thank you. And we have maybe time for one more follow-up question here. As you're thinking about some of those observations and frame of reference here in terms of readiness within institutions, how did you kind of obtain buy-in maybe from others there at Heartland or at other institutions? How do you see that process kind of unfolding?
Well, I think that I don't really like the term buy-in. Let me explain why. That suggests I'm trying to sell you something. What I prefer to do is try and get everyone to have ownership of what we're trying to do. And John has been fantastic with that. She's been working with other faculty across the college to design and deliver some gen ed courses that are specifically designed in a way that's competency-based and that fits into her program. And she's not done this by going to them and saying, I need you to do X, Y, Z. She's gone to them and say, I would like to do this thing here. How could you inform that process inside your discipline? And she's got some folks who stepped forward and said, I love this idea, and yes, I could do this. And so I know we're doing an earth science course, for instance, where one of our faculty who's been with us quite a number of years has just stepped in and said, this sounds great. Let's see what I can come up with. So she's not buying into the idea. She's creating ownership of that approach in her discipline and applying it to Jana's program. So I think that's what's critical. Is it's not about, I mean, even if we go back in time, and Jana gives me credit with what it's probably not due, but we were talking in her program review, and I said, you know, wouldn't it be better if all of your courses aligned with the industry certificates? And that little seed, she took that and she grew that really into something that I think is an innovative, creative, groundbreaking program model that I hope will be duplicated elsewhere. But it's because she owns that idea. That it may have been a kernel of a thought that I gave her, but she owns it and she's running with it. So that really is what makes it possible. Is even if I came up with a thought, it's not my program, it's hers, and she owns it. And she's doing great work.
Thank you. And thank you, Rick, for taking those questions that were just kind of coming in here, you know, in the chat box throughout your presentation. I so much appreciate, and I guess one of the pieces that really strikes kind of a chord with me is really, you were talking about such a workforce or student-centric model. Really, how do we help this student? How do we help that workforce? And it was just, it's very powerful. So thank you for joining us today, Rick. We've got your name and address there. There may be some folks who reach out to you. We greatly appreciate you having joined us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.